Hello, Sandy.
Just checking in with you. Discussion in-
Sorry?
Antonio just posted he's not coming.
Antonio posted that he's not coming. I got you. Well, it is up to you. If you rather continue moving forward, or you rather wait for the whole group and push it off for next week. I am fine with that, of course, but I don't want you to feel that you are missing out in any way.
I'm okay to continue. It's probably boring if it's just me sitting here with you reading.
No, not at all. Why is this? It's okay.
I mean,
one Noahide, one soul is a whole world.
Okay, then.
I guess we could give a minute to see if Jonathan is going to join.
Yeah, I pinged him again just to see, hey, are you coming?
No problem. And Lynn might join.
It would be nice if people that come on and watch would join, feel comfortable joining. I think that's a great place.
I hear that, but just like with lurkers and these things at time, people need to feel comfortable with this.
So I have to stop inviting them to Jacob's channel.
No. I think that's great. Again, not to get into too much detail publicly, but I hope sending you strength, and my prayers are with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to take a week or so to get through some of my funk.
That makes sense to me.
Oh.
1 second. Where are we over here? What chapter? Number 10, right?
And it said 10 and 11 this week, so I don't know which, but.
Right. Why did I do that, though? Is 10 short?
I think so.
Because 10 is short. Okay, I got it. Now I understand. All right, let me just make this a little bigger for our screen. Okay. All right. And on the comments, anyone welcome to join. Let me just put that out there. Okay, that is out.
You have the link?
Yes, I have the link as well.
Okay, awesome. Oh, it is there. Bad eyesight.
All right. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start Noahiding. All right. So laws of the state. And this is what I was talking about, that I mentioned last week that Jacob might not like this, but I just wanted to give some framing. Well, I should start first with the fact that we are very thankful for Jacob for allowing us to use his StreamYard, allowing us to stream in his channel. Jacob specifically is not a fan of the Zionistic movement and project. He sees this as not only counterproductive, but potentially even he sees it as idol worship, or idolatry at least. And therefore, again, we appreciate him being able to accommodate such ideas like these on his channel. So thank you, Jacob, for allowing that. Much appreciated, and a great example of inclusivity and tolerance. So thank you. Having said that, I think he's mistaken when it comes to this. And I would just mention that most early Jewish commentators did believe that appointing a king was a commandment, yet the scripture specifically suggests that it really depends on the people's will. And there is a rabbi named the Netziv from a place called Volozhin, and he pointed out that the governance, right, and its stability, it varies over time. And we could, if we appoint a king, in the wrong time, and if it's not appropriate, this could endanger the nation, right? We could have some crazy king that decides to, completely devastate the nation or start having very draconian rules. So that would be very problematic. And that's why the Torah's command is conditional. And it's indicating that, and it also mentions if you look around you and you see the nations around you have a king, that's the way the scripture articulates this. And this means that it's the right time to take on a king, or king meaning a political system, right? As long as it only makes sense if we see in the neighboring states around us that a monarchy is more successful, right? Like I could be going in and I just have a prophet, right? Little Israel has some other version of governments, and then they're looking around and they're seeing what's happening around them. And then they see, it looks like these two states are actually doing fantastic and their system is doing fantastic. Then we are to look around and realize that it's okay for us to adopt this. And I would go further and say it's not only okay for us to adopt this, you could say that there's a deeper purpose over here, which is God is commanding of an establishment of a state, right? And this is not just for religious purposes. This is to fulfill the universal mission that we have and set an example for the whole world. And the Torah ties Israel's political regime to its potential impact on the global political culture. And it's emphasizing the need of a connection to influence with others, right? So if everyone else has around me has a king, or everyone else is playing a certain game, as long as it's moral and we see that it's productive, and I, as in the nation of Israel, want to fulfill my destiny and be a light unto the nations, right? So I need to be able to communicate also with them. And so just like I could realize that maybe using electricity or using proper technology, this is not something that, if Egypt or some other nation makes some amazing novel technology, is there a reason why Israel wouldn't want to adapt that idea if it makes sense and I could elevate it and orient it toward God? So same with the political movements and structures. We're here too. This is something that we need to take on. I should specify that I do not believe that the current government in Israel, nor any previous government in Israel, is that manifestation. Okay, I don't believe that. I believe that the mission of creating or taking on and manifesting in a political force that allowed for the establishment of the state of Israel those are data points, hints, and seedlings of the right direction.
I have a sort of question coming from my own background and upbringing. So even like if you take what you just told me, and for me hello,
Hi, Lynn.
For me, like growing up in a Christian context, there would have been just the book, the written Torah, and you're saying the Torah says. My understanding had been that. Well, and granted, it gets convoluted because obviously they really like David as king and Solomon as king. But my understanding was that God had said no king, and therefore even the good kings were somehow breaking something God told them to do.
That is correct. That is correct. I would say yes, which is God attitude was, why are you guys taking on a king if you guys have prophets and you guys have a direct line to me, so to speak? Why are you doing this? Then I said, if you guys really want to, you guys can, but it's going to cause you trouble, right? I'm contrasting that with the fact that that all the nations of all the families of the world will be blessed through you, or in you, all the families of the world should be blessed. A promise that is given to Abraham. And then in Deuteronomy, we are told that. Yeah, 1 second. Let me find it for 1 second. Deuteronomy 17. And you shall say, I will set a king over me. You shall surely set a king over yourself. So this is where it seems like it's a commandment. And later on, it also says, like all the nations that are around me, right? And in a certain sense, again, it depends on the time and the context, right? If there are horrible kings running nations at the time, why are you looking for that kind of system? It clearly doesn't work. Stick with your prophet, focus that way. And there's been many examples where the monarchy was a disaster.
Like the king is not to replace God. The king in leadership. The king was not to replace God in leadership.
Correct.
Up until that point, what I had been told was like, so Israel had God as their king, and everybody else had just people as their king.
Correct.
And so when Israel was granted a king, the king's job through his advisors and still the prophets was to stay in close connection with God.
For sure. And not only that, he is to write a miniature Torah that he carries with him. Some look at this literally as in he had like a little Torah on his backpack or on his arm, and this is something he would carry with him wherever he goes. And some interpret this that he has to embody a dynamic understanding of the Torah when he comes and he goes, as in it could be that in a few more years you have to make sure the Torah is embodied and you have it with you, so as the world changes you could also change with it in that dynamic sense. But yes, definitely there as a not there to replace God, but again, that only works if you could actually create a proper orientation where that king understands his position towards the prophet, his position towards the people. He sees himself as a servant of God. So again, God says, look around. If you see that monarchy is working out, then great, then take on a king. And then here are all the laws that are relevant for said king, right? However, and again, I'm using king could be the democratic system, right? Which is not like, oh, it's the democratic system is divine. But that might be the best system that exists right now. And then the Jewish people and the nation of Israel, it would want to adopt the best system in order to promulgate their values and their ideas. So it could be that it's a monarchy, assuming that's making sense. It could be that it's democracy, assuming that's making sense. But more specifically, when God says to the nations that are around you, because we're in a context, I'm there to shine a light on be a light for these other nations. I'm not doing this in a vacuum. And if I'm not doing this in a vacuum, I need to be able to speak and understand and communicate with these other nations. And that would be through a political arm. But that was just, again, the framing of now when we're going back and talking about the laws of the state, right? So again, I'm not saying Israel right now is the manifestation of that. So Jacob, your heart palpitations, they could relax. I'm just saying that it is not foreign to our religion and tradition. And please, God, one day, soon by us, we will find proper leaders. The Messiah will come, our prophets will come back, and we'll all be celebrating at the temple. All right, let's take it in. I'll start with number one. The state is obligated to introduce laws and regulations for the betterment of society at large. The establishment of fair law is included in the Noahide laws, which mandates a court system, right? As we discussed earlier on, this is part of the 7 laws that we have. Inside the state that I have to make these laws. Now, of course, this is difficult for Noahides, and that's why Noahides could decide to connect themselves to a state, right? And then take on the laws of the state. Specifically with regards to the state of Israel, this would seem to make sense to connect yourself to the state of the Jewish people in a certain sense. Definitely once it becomes divinely inspired, right? You could say right now it's a secular country, so I don't have to necessarily be focusing on Israel. However, definitely with regards to the rabbis of Israel and the religious courts that we have and the rabbinic courts that we have, it would make sense for Noahides to pay attention to them and ideally, hopefully, cultivate their own communities where they could have their own courts as well. Number 2. It is an obligation to obey the laws of the state that do not contradict the 7 Noahide laws, right? So very important, of course. And you could see that the rule of law is very important, as we discussed in the past. Dina de malchuta dina, right? The law of the land is also the law that the Torah accepts. However, right, as long as it's not contradicting one of the 7 laws or the Torah laws. Now, we could have this is a very deep discussion because this is part of the strife that's going on in Israel, right? We have electric companies that have now like kosher electricity that they store up during the week so they could use on the Sabbath. And there's a question, obviously the secular people in the state would rather not be doing things in that manner, but there's obviously a tension there. And clearly we're not a religious state or a theocratic state right now. It's a secular state. However, I would say that in the IDF, for example, there are issues, right, for religious soldiers. And this is why they feel that they can't participate because they feel that this is contradicting the law or the Jewish halakha. And then there's different versions, right? Some of them are going to say listening to a woman sing is problematic, and therefore I can't be in the army service where women start singing. Other rabbis will be more lenient. Other rabbis will say it's okay, but this is that point of tension, right? So again, generally speaking, you abide by the law, not if it's if it contradicts your religion. Obviously, it's a bigger problem. And in theory, you are supposed to, of course, obey the religion. Then you have to ask your local rabbi what denomination you're on, and so on and so forth. The government, number 3. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just said that's really complicated. You've only got to number 2, and it's already reminding me of things that they would say in church around marriage, like if your husband's, requiring something evil, well, no, you have to do what God wants. And that's the one instance where you should disobey, what the husband says. And we're 2 steps in, and it basically goes back to what I was thinking when you were describing the difference between a monarchy and a democracy. The further down it trickles, the more responsibility on the people within and underneath whatever system to also be living up to it in the same way as if they were at the top of the system. It's hard. It's complicated.
It's very hard. It's a little easier for me because, this is like the mold that I'm born in, right? So I'm born into. So of course, I look at it differently, and this is also part of the tensions I was having with Gilad, which I said at some point, at the end of the day, like the way I look at the world is, that's baked into how I see the world. So a lot of these regulations, restrictions, traditions are very much codified. But yes, and as we say constantly, in the Noahide path, we're not trying to create more tension and create more pressure, right? You're not being obligated, hey, take this all on immediately after this class, right? So this is a program, and many of these things are not even relevant, right? Like right now you are living in your state and this is relevant to your state. Some of these things will be relevant, please God, in the future. Some of these things are relevant right now, but don't necessarily have to be taken on all at once.
Correct. But I guess I'm saying I do see already how this is applicable in places I've lived in the past and will do in the future. And I'm just recognizing that this isn't simplifying things. It's merely, shining some light on places that were already complex. And I might as well go, yeah, we're still there. It's complicated.
What I would offer, and perhaps this was offered in the previous context, that and you mentioned this to me in our private conversation on Discord when I was answering some of your questions over there, and you said I might want to know more information, but not now. Right. So here too, there is a plethora of more information over here. You can be rest assured. Whether or not you want to dive into that and at what level you want to dive into that, obviously one has to decide. And that could also be, when you hit a wall or hit a point where you feel the tension, then it might be worth it to potentially open this up. Number 3, the government has the authority to impose punishment on those who violate the state of the law, right? So obviously this is needed for the system to work, and it's a moral system and it's acting appropriately. So these are all the classic prerequisites, but you would say seemingly this would sound controversial, but we of course know for systems like this to work, we have to allow a certain level of authority to the governing body. Okay, do you want to take on 4 and 5?
Sure. Any law that discriminates between one citizen and another has no legal standing. and it is prohibited to punish anyone who violates such a law.
Right. So this is quite clear. Obviously, within Jewish law, there are built-in discriminations or differences or nuances between different groups and different classes. Having said that, as far as the law of the land, obviously, we don't want to take out any discrimination. And again, you would have to caveat that with affirmative action and all those elements. And then there's real questions about that. How does halacha see that? Is that appropriate or not? By doing affirmative action, are you actually really embodying what halacha really wanted to get to? So these are also questions that one has to consider carefully and seriously. But generally speaking, we want to avoid discrimination.
In this context, the state is any government accepted by the people that has control over currency, money, and military force. However, if the government is not accepted by all and does not issue legitimate currency, its laws are illegitimate, and it's like a band of robbers that seize control by force, whereupon the public is not obligated to obey its laws.
Right. Okay. So that would be a place like, so we see some flexibility over here, right? It's not like it's not as dogmatic as like you can't waver, you can't change your mind, you can't oppose the government. And if we see the state is failing and it's turned into North Korea, at that point, obviously you're not being told, no, that's still the supreme leader. No, at that point, you got to bounce if you can. You got to oppose it if you can. So, of course, here too, we're seeing the Torah trying to be as realistic as possible with regards to how these things end up playing out in the real world. Number 6, defensive war is permissible. War to save another nation under attack is also permissible. Offensive war requires the approval of a prominent moral figure, right? So, I'm not trying to get into politics, but I'm just using this as an example. We spoke about this in the past that the IDF is called the Israel Defense Force, right? It's not the IAF, the Israel Attack Force. The attitude is to be on the defensive over here, and there's a big focus on morality. If during the time of war, the Israelites would have spoken to their authority, which was the Sanhedrin or the Urim V'Tumim, the chest plate that the high priest wore, that mystical element, not element, what's the word I'm looking for? Relic, right?
Yeah. Relic is better.
So, right. So that's so they would ask that authority, which is of course coming from God, and that is the pinnacle of morality, of course. And so obviously this is very different, but in the same vein, a country still, before you go out to an offensive war, you really want to make sure that the person that is doing this was, and this goes back to, we have to be very careful who we elect, who we bring into power, because we want moral people. And this is very apropos with regards to the elections that America is going through, right? Is Sleepy Joe the person I want sending me on an offensive war? Like, is he fully with it? And is he weighing all the implications? Is Donald Trump the guy that's going to do it? Or is he thinking about his own ego, right? And before I'm sending out these young boys and girls and men and women to be killed, how am I doing this? So we have to be very, very careful. And unfortunately, we don't have the Urim V'Tumim anymore. So at the very least, we must make sure that a prominent moral figure, or ideally the governing body, is doing so according to ethical considerations.
Without the Urim and I just lost it. Without that contact with God that comes from using those.
Yeah.
Does that put, because I'm thinking that would have been worn by the high priest, would it not?
Yep.
So then you've already kind of eliminated one connection. Now you're out to either the high priest without that, or the general body of the priestly caste. And
well, the Sanhedrin at that point.
Is it the Sanhedrin? Okay.
Yeah, because the priestly class is doing its thing in the temple, and it's work within the Holy of Holies and the high priest specifically. I'm not asking his permission. I'm asking him to be a conduit now between God and through this relic to let me know, yes, no, the colors, the letters on the chest plate would light up, right? Yes, no, going to battle, not.
Were the Sanhedrin around at the same time? And
yes.
If so, would they have, so they would have inquired via the high priest if things came up.
If possible. If not, then there's just the Sanhedrin. And then if there's no Sanhedrin, I mean, there was also the prophets, of course, at the time. And if there's no Sanhedrin, then we are left with like the sages of the generation. And at that point, we, of course, start with the zugot, the pairs. And then we start realizing that we no longer have we no longer have the single truth, right? We have different opinions. And then we also look at those different opinions as different aspects of the truth to make sure that from here on going forth, we have to make sure we are allowing for many opinions to be heard, because we have to make sure we could still ultimately attach and put together this tapestry, this mosaic, because we've already lost that direct line of prophecy, and tradition.
It almost sounds like once you get down to the Sanhedrin, then if that's the stopping point, it sounds like there's somewhat of a fracturing in which majority is needed simply for testing.
And that's what the Sanhedrin ultimately takes on. It takes on majority rule, because then that's the system that allows us to move forward in the most productive and honest way. While, of course, that doesn't mean majority rule doesn't mean I don't want to hear your opinion anymore. Your opinion is valid, and more that I've mentioned this a few times this week. The school of Hillel would also make sure to teach and mention the opposing view first, right? So there's still a place for that. The question is, at some point, you need to know how to act, right? The left hand, the sword has to come down, and you have to be able to know what to do. A decision has to be made. So yes, at that point, there's a bifurcation. We also see this in the wording of Moses receives the Torah from God, and that's supposed to be untarnished. But then every time it used umasar, and then he passed it on, that is no longer receiving, which is more complete. Passing it on now is already diluted in a certain sense. And then again, there's a receiving. So it was a more diluted Torah, but still received by the next group. But then again, they pass it down, and then there's confusion again. So
if that's the case, no, that's, if that's the case, then okay, this is a thing I do. If I'm asking a question, or if I'm putting something to somebody, one of the things that I still tend to do, that I've done for a while, is if then I feel that I turn to God and I say, this is up to you now to speak to this person on my behalf, I'll pray for this person to hear clearly, and for, for that conversation to go well, because there's a word, I'm not finding it. It's not respect, it's not justice, but something where if I'm going to put something to somebody else, I have to hold it in a place where I'm willing to offer that up and the person up to God, as in a way of saying, this person is on my heart, wanting only good for them, even if they come back at me with a negative answer, which can make it be even harder if you have a follow-up conversation on a negative answer. But and I don't know if that's just a Christian thing or me being weird thing, but it sounds like that's the point in the story where you're showing how it goes down, where, like in Judaism, where it talks about the light, that, you're in more desperate need of all the little lights, wanting to help those sort of at the top be able to see, to be able to provide more light simply by just turning our hearts to God and asking for the people in charge.
Well, yeah, we're definitely supposed to ultimately seek and look for those leaders who we believe are holding the torch or the light properly, so we could benefit from them. And our job, in a certain sense, if I understand correctly, is to shine a light on those people, and hopefully they're shining the light. So yes, we're all holding our own flashlights. We have to make sure our batteries are changed and we're pointing them properly.
Yeah.
7, states are obligated to uphold international agreements that govern the rules of war, right? So that's very understandable. And again, this is in the context of us realizing and recognizing that there's other states, right? And all of this makes sense if you believe in a state body or a political body. And this is why I go back to like the state being a natural evolution of what is required in the Messianic era. 8, the state has the authority to endanger the lives of its citizens by means of military action that promotes national security or by war. This goes back to, of course, needing a moral leader who's making these decisions, of course. I would also just explain the difference, which is we don't really have this so much in today's Western world, but there is definitely a shift towards the individual rights, me, my life, how I see it. I'm the influencer. The world, revolves around me. In Judaism, it is, of course, called a living tree, an Etz Chaim, to those who hold on to it. And we are promulgating life, and we have all these commandments to do, and we need to be alive through them, and we want to be creating life and celebrating life. And we are supposed to do that. Part of the celebration of life is, of course, also reaching out to the poor, to the needy, helping people out. It's not necessarily being selfish, but you are working on yourself by participating in the Torah and also working with your community. And that's why if there's a war that is, for the expansion of the land, and this is not a necessary war, okay, you don't have to go. And in that sense, we're here to say, like, you're an individual. Of course, you have to think about yourself in that aspect. However, when it is a necessary battle, then, of course, you are no longer an individual. You are part of a collective. You are a part of the group. And at that point, then the nation could sacrifice you for the good of the nation. And that seems scary, of course, but you willingly buy into that when you're saying, I am part of a bigger body. I'm part of the nation. And Judaism is not here, and other religions do offer, like Christianity and Islam, offer the individual salvation in a certain sense. Judaism comes in here to offer the nation, the crowd, right? That all of us together are holy. And in order to do so, you have to see yourself as part of a crowd in these moments. So when something like this happens, then yes, you could be called on to and expected to give your life. Of course, the person making those shots and those calls and those decisions should be someone that's moral, that is being guided by ethical and ideally, if by ethical means and by ethical considerations. Number 9, proper conduct in wartime. Before resorting to war, there must first be a call for peace, right? So this is always important to remember. Moses is commanded to do so, and he does so. In a beautiful manner, because we are looking for peace. We are not trying to fight with anyone. Some people say peace means to surrender, right? It doesn't necessarily mean I just want to come in peace. That means like I'm giving you the option to surrender. Joshua, we are taught that Joshua, when he was conquering the land, went around giving out the quote unquote flyers that the Israeli Air Force gives out, saying like whoever wants to run could run, whoever wants to give up could give up. And the attitude was like, don't walk in guns blazing, right? We want to first offer peace. And that, I believe, is also the proper way to act. And of course, in our day today, we also hope that all countries could behave in such a manner. Number 10, In the military camp, modesty and guarded speech, i.e., without gossip or insult, are to be practiced. Right. So this is quite remarkable that this is being this is sort of the standard we want. And first of all, God is always watching us. We always need to be representing Him, whether it's to the nations of the world, to ourselves, to our comrades in battle as well. And you know what? Let's even read the footnote because it's so amazing that this was done. 343 is footnote. Where is this? 343. Right. Okay. Okay. Give me a minute, Sandy, if you don't mind. I just think it's important. Let me try to give this a go. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Okay, we see over here, if anyone among you has been rendered impure, okay, by a nocturnal emission, he must leave the camp and he must not re-enter the camp, right? Towards the evening, he shall bathe in water. We want to make sure he's going to be clean. We speak about how if he needs to relieve himself, he has to take a little shovel outside the camp, cover it up, right? And this is the Torah speaking. Right, all these years ago, and it's important how when we see that Bilam, the wicked prophet, sees how the tents of Jacob are oriented, and this bothers him. Right, so already here we see that the Israelites are trying to already cultivate this ethical behavior, even in the encampment itself. So I think this is quite remarkable, and we of course hope that all nations of the world and all armies of the world can behave this way. While I believe that the IDF acts in a extremely high moral standard, of course, there are still many issues like there is in all armies, and it behooves them to remember how they are expected to behave and that God above is always watching them. 11, the enemy is to be allowed avenues of escape for those who do not wish to fight. So, like I believe Israel is doing right now and has done in the past, we do not want unnecessary war. We do not want unnecessary bloodshed. Not everyone's an enemy. So, of course, it's beautiful to see how these things are built in, right? We are not being told this by the UN or by some general body. We are being told this by the sages of Israel who recognize that these are the values that God wants to see manifest in the world. 12, anyone in their first year of marriage is exempt from military service. Now, this has to do, it depends if it's an expansion war or if this is a necessary war on defending the land. Because if he must fight, then he must fight, and then he also leaves the altar, so to speak. That's how we say yotzeh chatan mechupato. He has to leave the wedding canopy and go out and join the war. However, in this case, where he doesn't have to fight, we come and say either it's because of compassion. We understand that this is his first year. We want to make sure that that year is full of love, and that year is we call it the first year, the Shana Rishana. We spoke about this in an earlier chapter, how the Torah, it's very important generally to cultivate a marriage, but specifically that first year, make sure that it's really a honeymoon year, so to speak, because that gives you a very good base and foundation for those troubling years in the future. There's another opinion, which is this guy just got married. Do I want this guy in the trenches with me right now? Bugging out, thinking about his wife. Like, so we often want to make sure that the person's in the right mindset right now to really engage in battle while unfortunate but potentially necessary. All right, moving on to number 11. Do you? We still got time to do so. Do you want to take that on?
Sure. And you shall love the Lord your God. Exodus 23:25. To love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Deuteronomy 11:13. The 7 Noahide laws are the basis of serving God. The appropriate way of serving God differs from one person to the next and from one society to the next. No binding laws were made concerning this important matter in order to allow the development of paths of divine service in keeping with the needs of each individual. What follows are some fundamental principles within the Torah that can serve as, that can serve as, where am I?
A template for this service.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. And you read that beautifully. Thank you very much. So what a beautiful, beautiful text, right? You're being told over here. I'm not cramming it down your throat. I'm not telling you what you need to say. It's between you and God. It's an intimate relationship between you and God. And more than that, we want it to be unique. It's going to be different for you than it is for me. And that is to express to you that, that God is also not fixed into a little box, right? We're here for an everlasting, dynamic conversation. Now, of course, since as the Hebrews, we believe that we have the longest tradition, so to speak, of having this kind of communication, we offer the tools and the sequences that we use to allow this to happen properly. But we'll get into what that actually means. One, take it away.
A proclamation of faith in God and his oneness is upheld by recital of the Shema. That is, by reciting the verse, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," every day. This is known as accepting upon oneself the yoke of heaven. The Shema may be recited in any language.
Right? So we're being told this is what it is at the end of the day. Now, generally speaking, we believe that this is like the monotheistic statement, right? However, according to Rashi, he says that this is a mission statement, right? When this is being said with Moses, at that time we're saying we recognize that Elohim and the Tetragrammaton are one, that these God number one, God number two elements are one. The world does not realize that yet. One day the world will realize that as well. It's really the mission statement. And the fact that you are reading this right now is a part of that culmination, which is the nations of the world are coming back and saying, I want to participate in this. I also want to unify your name as one. And I see you now like that, right? So that was a 2,000 year longer journey that we've been waiting for the whole world to proclaim this. Arguably, you would say that Ishmael did a very good job at this as well. Right? The Muslim world is very adamant about one God. And this is in their praise that they've done a very good job with this. Of course, Christianity also in its own way, and definitely according to some sages, still ultimately is calling for the unification of God. The Trinity is complicated, but generally speaking, that is what it's asking for as well. And that's why, again, it can be said in any language. We Jews, observant Jews, say it a few times a day. We recite this verse as well. I should mention in our history, there are, of course, these would be the words you'd most probably hear for someone in the Holocaust before being killed. Famously, Rabbi Akiva, when he is caught by the authorities, he is killed, and they are flaying his skin with combs of metal. And he sings, he recites the Shema, and his students ask, like, how are you doing this right now? Like, look at the level of like pain you're in. And he says, all my life I was hoping to have the opportunity to say with all my heart and all my soul, and I never knew when that was going to happen. And finally, God has given me the opportunity to say it right now with all my soul. Those are, of course, very, very difficult statements. That brings in the question of evil in the world. We won't go down that path right now. There's stories. I'm sure there'll be stories in this war as well, but in previous wars in Israel where you hear many stories of soldiers, a grenade gets thrown into the room, the soldier jumps on the grenade and then yells. I'm just getting emotional right now because I was seeing this interview where you see these secular Israeli soldiers are in an interview talking about this other soldier, and they said, and he jumped on the grenade, and it was like, he's like, literally, like from the stories I heard, he just proclaimed the Shema. And there's something beautiful about that. Obviously, the willingness to jump down, to understanding what your job is to protect the other, doing so selfishly, and then proclaiming your faith in God, of course, is it's terrifying and beautiful moment as well. So, of course, I do not want Rabbi Akiva's death. Having said that, part of me also wishes to, exemplify such devotion to God, of course. Very, very beautiful, of course. Let's move on to number 2. One of the most praiseworthy ways for every individual of serving God is through prayer, in which a person turns to God with a request to fulfill his needs. And it also includes praise and thanks to God, right? And we're going to, of course, discuss more about this when we are learning the segment about prayer and when we learn the prayer book. But we are cultivating the words of the prophets, but we are left to the words of the prophets. So these are still divine sequences, not all of them. Of course, there are things that were brought on later on, and they're beautiful and they're cultural, but they're not as, I would say they're not as divinely, well, I don't know if they're not divinely inspired. They're not necessarily traditional and divine sequences that we still have, like the Shema or the standing prayer, that the prophets were still involved with putting those things together, those prayers together. There's, of course, traditions with regards to that I don't know which denomination this is in Christianity, but that some of the old ancient church songs and hymns are actually tunes that were taken from the temple, from the Levites, and then over the years. So there's something even still there potentially, and we even have in our daily prayers that we read on the Sabbath. Sorry, not the daily prayers. We read about the prayer of the soul, and there's potentially influences from Saint Peter. Again, we have a beautiful intertwined relationship, Christians and us. Number 3, prayer is the service of the heart, avodah shebalev, or work of the heart. The sages say, what is the service of the heart? It is prayer, right? So again, we'll speak about this more in depth when we speak about the prayer, but this is also, we call it service because it's one working on oneself. It's looking inwards, understanding how you need to improve. By improving yourself, you will, of course, also be a boon to others around you. And ultimately, it's focused on prayer. 4, a prayer is carried out in 2 forms: individual prayer and public prayer. So, how would I go about explaining this? There's the formal prayer that we're talking about. There's 3 times a day. There's a group of 10 people. You get together and you pray with them. There is what we call a minyan factory. It's a synagogue that has from 6 o'clock in the morning till around 10 o'clock in the afternoon. There's a few rooms, and every 20 minutes, 30 minutes, there's a new prayer service starting. And there's people in today's culture that will run into one, move into another one, switch around. And that would be sort of a mix of formal prayer and individual prayer. And ultimately, God wants to see us. There's an element of praying together in a quorum or in a group. God wants to see us ultimately overcoming our differences and uniting as one. And so in that sense, that prayer is preferable, but that doesn't mean at any point that you can't insert your own prayer, your personal prayer, while you're walking prayer. Like prayer it's open season all day long. And more than that, it's understandable if, as we see from Hannah's prayer, when she was speaking in front of Eli, her lips were moving, but no sound comes out. And he thinks that she's a drunk. And she's like, no, dude, I'm just doing my own thing. So just relax. And we also learned from her how that is how one should pray today. He should be articulating the words, but only that he himself could hear it, he shouldn't be disturbing other people's prayer service. Why don't you take on 4 and 5? 4 we just did, right?
4.
Let's take on 5, 6, 7.
5. It is especially appropriate to pray during difficult times.
I think enough said. Giving the right. Okay, it's go on.
Yeah. 6. Ever since the destruction of the Holy Temple, prayer has taken the place of sacrifices.
Right. So here, there's a whole different conversation about the origin of sacrifices, are they still going to be relevant or not? But the general idea is, even if the sacrifice is still today, prayer is still sacrifice. They're sacrificing ego. They're sacrificing time to be participating in the prayer. So yes, there's no blood of the lamb, so to speak, in this sense. But ultimately, also the prophet tells us it was going to be a house of prayer for all the nations. So again, there's a debate whether or not the practice of sacrifices, of animal sacrifice, will be reestablished when the temple comes. Regardless, we're definitely being told that prayer, and I also believe that according to Maimonides, the fact that we have sacrifices, this is a cultural appropriation of a different mode of expression that we needed to slowly wean ourselves off of, right? But while we're in the desert, and we could clearly see with the golden calf, like, these Israelites are not ready to go towards like invisible God solo yet. There needs to be some sort of mediation. And then at some point, there's a level of, yes, this is only going to be happening, but only in the temple, right? There's no building altars in other places. This is only happening up here, right? We are harnessing the very intense and strong forces of nature, which the pagans, and we're definitely tapping into a truth over there. However, we're trying to elevate the nature and bring it towards the divine, or through the nature, see where God is there on the other side. Having said that, as we mature in a certain sense, there's mindfulness and meditation is, I would say, a higher level of that in a certain sense, where you realize to sacrifice your state of mind, like we said, your ego, your time, into focusing on the divine, and hopefully embodying that state of mind at all times. But greater rabbis than me will decide what happens with the sacrifices. Let's move on to number 7.
It is good to pray and beg for heavenly mercy every day. How is this done? A person begins by praising God and then asks for what he needs by making requests and supplications, and afterwards gives praise and thanks to God for his favors, each person according to his own ability.
Right. So again, we'll get more into prayer when we're talking about the prayer section, when we read the prayer book. However, it still gives you a general framing over here of what we were talking about, of this, you sort of sandwiching in the middle your own personal requests, making sure to start with praise and end it with praise, as you would with the king, right? We want to, of course, know our humble ourselves and know our position. That doesn't mean we're still talking to our Father, and that doesn't mean we can't ask for things. And Dad doesn't always say yes, right? Sometimes Dad says no, and even that is a loving answer, which is sometimes hard for us to comprehend that. This is also one of the reasons why we cover our eyes when we say the Shema, because demanding from us to understand that all is one and all is God means that also bad things are also from God. And that is very hard for our eyes, because our eyes don't see that. We only see, it's easy for us to see God through the good. Seeing God through the bad, through evil, is very difficult for us. Now, our prophets tell us this and explain to us that this is true. However, we need to cover our eyes, because we need this sort of visual dissonance, this cognitive dissonance that we have, which is I'm proclaiming something which my eyes refuse to see. So I will cover my eyes and through faith understand that this is true. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean, I was speaking about this recently also, that even when we say, we are not being told to understand how God thinks, right? I'm not being told to say like, oh, Hitler is a good guy. Hitler's an evil person. Is there a ultimate good behind that manifestation? Of course there is, because it's all God. Do I understand that? No. So as the verse says, that the memory of Amalek, forget what that means, needs to be erased underneath the heavens. But it's not speaking about above the heavens, right? Above the heavens, that's for God's calculations of what that makes sense and how it makes sense. For the way humans comprehend things, I have to understand that this is an evil I need to get rid of. However, I will close my eyes and make this prayer, because I recognize that ultimately these things are good. And we make the blessing of the Shema in the twilight. between night and morning, in the evening, in the afternoon, when the times are changing, right? When doubt comes in, 1 second, the darkness is coming, and what that symbolizes. That's when I close my eyes and I remind myself, I'm not going to look at the world in front of me right now and assume I understand it as is. I'm going to have faith. Sorry that I did a little deep dive on that.
No, all good.
Let's move on to 8, 9, 10.
A person should endeavor to pray in a clean place while dressed in his clothes.
So like we spoke about earlier, of course, we spoke about the war encampment, where it needs to be clean, it needs to be holy. But this is true about a synagogue, right, where this is happening. This is always a point of tension in like summer camps, right? So it's, can you pray in sandals and in shorts? The answer is yes, but if you're touching your skin, you should really go wash your hands and clean yourself. You want to be inappropriate. So if there's bad smells, if there's a smelly diaper in the synagogue, you might stop your prayer, remove it, and continue, right? We want to make sure people are focused. From the level of respect, right? It's not like that God needs it, but it makes sense for us to make sure that that's happening. And also for our own sense of focus, and we don't want to be distracted by things like this, of course. So, and this also, of course, someone sitting down in the middle of prayer and is scratching his ears or cleaning his teeth or rubbing his toes, that is not appropriate behavior. And it's always, imagine you were sitting in front of the king, right? Would you be doing this in front of the Queen of England? The answer is no. So how can you be doing this in front of God? And we always say there's always like signs in synagogues. If you came here to speak, where are you going to pray, right? Like, so, so let's try to keep it quiet. Of course, there's synagogues that there's a lot of talking going on. In our synagogue, they have a very zero tolerance for talking. It doesn't mean that there's a lot of singing, a lot of smiling, but not a lot of chit chat. Number 9, Noahides are not required to pray in a formalized, codified manner. The sages of Israel fixed the precise words, manner, and times by which Jews should pray. Noahides are welcome to take inspiration from these practices and adapt them for their own needs. And this goes back to how we started this section, which is it's your own individual path, and no one's expecting the Nigerian Noahide to look like the Canadian Noahide. We want to make sure that we're still generally speaking the same language, and that doesn't necessarily mean literally the same language, right? But here too, like we said, Judaism has a history of having these sequences, this tradition, and therefore it makes sense for Noahides to take these things on. But it's not a must. You can, like we speak about all these proper conduct behavior. 10. There are a number of prayer books available today that have been composed specifically for the Noahides, right? Okay, so there are differences in the prayer book, right? Like you're not going to say the God of my forefathers, and there's certain words there, and you could say, but He is the God of my forefathers. Ultimately, here it's speaking about like Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac and Jacob. That I was been commanded to, right? I use the word I was commanded to. In some verses, you're not going to use that because you weren't commanded to. And that doesn't mean that God's not interested and not hearing you and doesn't appreciate the prayer. All that's true. There's just nuances that we just have to take into consideration when we're saying these things. And there's also differences between the prayer book. We specifically will be learning the one of Brit Olam. Okay. Offering of a sacrifice, whether from animals or plants, is not common in these days. Nevertheless, Noahides may offer burnt offerings to God on an altar that they may build, but it is forbidden to sacrifice an animal lacking a limb. For details regarding this matter, sages of Israel should be consulted. So I would say that, like we said, this is ultimately, God wants us to see doing good deeds and prayer, and that's sort of the mode we're in right now. But it depends on the culture, right? It could be that for some African group in Noahide group, they want to celebrate the son's bar mitzvah with, okay, so guess what? You can do so if done properly. And like we just said, if it's in the right context, and you speak to your rabbi, so he might be saying like, he definitely can't be, I don't know, don't be dancing around the altar. They'll have all the other prohibitions that are relevant to that, but that is something that is possible, and there will be an example of the difference, right? Number 12, it is fitting for one bringing the sacrifice to select an especially fine animal with which to honor God, right? So this makes sense. Of course, we learn from the story of Cain and Abel. While it is true that Cain, it was his idea to bring the offering, right? So we want to make sure it's an offering. However, he was stingy. He didn't bring the grade A stuff. And that's why we see that there's a certain disappointment over there, which is God is not saying, I needed something from you. I think it's amazing that you got to a point, Cain, where you're saying, you know what? I need to do something to show my appreciation. So God says, great, you've managed to get to that level to move beyond yourself. But then immediately you fell back into the ego trap. Well, I'm not going to give him like the grade A stuff. Then you're not really there yet. You don't really realize the game we're playing. And that's why, of course, well, we know how that story ends. Can I ask you to take on 13?
In a time when the holy temple is standing, Noahides may bring burnt offerings to sacrifice there.
Please God, we're all looking forward for that day. May it come soon. 14. Whoever says this animal is for sacrifice has consecrated the animal to God and is forbidden to use for any other purpose. Right? So we have to be very careful with the words we use. Of course, there's many laws that are involved with this, so we won't get too deep into this idea, but the attitude is if you say this is for God publicly, or there's a sense even to yourself, words matter, right? And this also, yes, this relates to number 15, making vows that forbid certain pledges, such as the Nazarite vow and other vows of similar nature, are not a practice of non-Jews. Nevertheless, it is proper for a person to be careful about standing by all the words and any vows that he makes. Right? We spoke about this earlier on, taking vows, what that means. Words matter, and we should be taking that seriously. When taking vows on a Bible, if it is a Bible, should it be an Old Testament? Do I say I take a vow, or do I say I declare? We spoke about how to act with someone that makes vows. I would also mention over here that just on the Nazarite vow, specifically for Jews, the Nazarite at the end of his period, and there's different versions of how long how long he undertook to take on this vow, he brings a sin offering to the temple. And the reason he brings a sin offering to the temple is because you might have reached these high levels of spirituality. Nevertheless, to do so, you decided to deny yourself the gifts of God, right? You said, I'm no longer going to have this. And God says, that's great that on one level you hit reach that new spiritual height. However, you still denied what I gave you. And because of that, you are going to bring a sin offering, right? So there's still an issue with the Nazarite. And in general, we're saying that this is not relevant for non-Jews. That doesn't mean they can't take on vows. And if they do take on vows, they need to be very careful with keeping to their words. 16, the location of the Holy Temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem has a very great holiness, and thus there are many restrictions on entering the site. Non-Jews are permitted on the site up to the area once occupied by the temple courtyard. Even in areas where it is permissible to enter, reverential honor should be shown, since it is a unique place set aside by the Creator to serve him. So this, of course, there's a lot of political tension around this place. In the Emirates, actually, though, and in some Arab cultures, they've already recognized that the Al-Aqsa mosque is not the Golden Dome mosque. It's actually it's nearby a much smaller silver dome, and that is the Al-Aqsa mosque. The mosque with the golden dome, if you go inside it even says in Arabic, the temple, Beit HaMikdash. So that was really a place that was set aside for the Jews and honored for the Jews. That translation and tradition has long been lost. There are people that go up to the Temple Mount. I personally was never on the Temple Mount. It's quite crazy because on the Temple Mount currently, if you go on, you are not allowed to bring any prayer book with you if you're a Jew. You're not allowed to pray, and if they see you mumbling, you get into a lot of trouble, which is quite crazy. But nevertheless, the status quo and avoiding tensions was and is an ideal. There's a lot of tension over there, and of course, it's going to recognize my Muslim brothers to see me for who I am, as the nation of Israel coming back to its land. And as the angel tells Hagar, return to your mistress. And by that it means return, shuvi, tshuva, repent. Come back into the tent of Abraham and we could live together peacefully. And hopefully those happen soon. As far as the exact location of the temple, we're never told in the Bible that this is the location. Yes, the place Jerusalem is mentioned many times, and by the Bible I mean in the 5 books. We're not being told that that's where it is. However, we are told that it is the place, the mountain. Those obscure terms are used. We are known that they are they rest between the shoulders of Judah and Benjamin, and that would be a place in Israel, location where the settlements, not the settlements, where the land portion for Judah and Benjamin meet. This also relates to a vision of the King David. If people want to get into more exact sources of how we identify that as being the place, is welcome to ask on the Discord. Okay. We are almost done, so let's take on the last few. Okay. Cleaving to God. 17. Any person whose benevolent spirit. This is really, so this is taken from Maimonides. This is quite a fascinating text. It's actually, it really begins with not only the tribe of it starts with not only the tribe of Levite, but any person whose benevolent spirit and understanding mind have brought him to live separately, to stand before the Lord, to serve and worship him, to gain knowledge of the Lord, and to walk in a straight path as God created him, and to remove from his neck the yoke of human calculations, is consecrated as the most holy soul, and the Lord will be his portion and his inheritance forever and ever. Now, what's amazing about these dramatic verses, or this dramatic verse, is he's talking about a non-Jew, right? Maimonides is talking to the world, and ultimately he's saying, and we spoke about this in the intro, between the difference of the Noahide and the individual, the Moses path and the Abraham path, where Maimonides says in the laws of kings and kings and their wars, talks about how for a group that wants to become the Noahides, right, then you gotta connect back to Moses, to the laws, to the individual, right, to the lonely monk, right. He also could connect to God if he really wants to. Now we could expand this, of course, as well. And like we said, like Abraham was running before God, right? He was, unlike Enoch and Noah, he wasn't sort of walking with God or behind God, but rather he was looking to stand alone and just embody what God is asking from him, even without being asked, right? I want to live in this sense. So it's a very, very powerful quote by Maimonides. 18. Torah study conducted at fixed times and with self-sacrifice is among the supreme values of the Jewish people. Whoever is occupied with Torah for his own sake merits many, many things, right? So you and I are participating in this right now. I'm not trying to give myself a thing about like the sacrifice I'm doing, but the attitude is this, of course, not only do I enjoy this, and I enjoy my time with you, Sandy, but the reason like my wife appreciates this is because she sees this as a value, right? Learning Torah, understanding God, manifesting Torah values, sharing Torah values. This is extremely, extremely important. And Noahides also can make themselves study groups. There's podcasts. All those things could still be considered the study of Torah. And we, of course, are worried about acting properly, not because we gain the reward, where we're not doing this for the reward. We want to be part of a spiritual circle. And so that's why, while this is the bread and butter in the Jewish life, this is a recommended practice for Noahides to give themselves and build, you could call them Bible studies, but really allow time every day to ruminate and participate in the learning of Torah. Number 19. There is a difference of opinion among the sages as to what is the appropriate extent to which a Noahide should learn the Torah. There are those who restrict study of the parts of the Torah with universal application, which touch on the foundations of the faith, morality, and the law that are meant especially for Noahides. And there are those who distinguish between a non-Jew who did not take upon himself the 7 Noahide laws, who would be listed and as stated in his study as a proper Noahide who has permitted to learn the entire Torah. This second opinion is the prevailing one. Okay, so there are different opinions out there with different Noahide groups. This, of course, is the opinion of Rav Cherki. And of course, like he says, even according to the first opinion, if a Noahide is participating in it, he should be only studying things that are relevant to the Noahide. But is faith relevant to the Noahide? Great. So all the books on faith. And so it starts becoming a very, very wide, very wide options of things that you could still participate in. And of course, in the more prevailing opinion, you could participate in everything. One should be clear that, not to get too technical, but in the words of Maimonides, he does distinguish between and this is in the Laws of Kings and the Wars, between a Gentile in section 9 of the Halacha and someone who still practices idolatry, right? That's someone that did not take on the Noahide laws. And then he explicitly writes that is someone, a Noahide that could perform any of the commandments that he wants to from the Torah. There are, of course, and again, this is subject to debate, but the most important thing is to not allow for there to be confusion, for someone not to see you as a Jew if you're not a Jew. And there's questions about even, participating in Shabbat. How would a Noahide observe the Shabbat? Not exactly like a Jew, but he could still commemorate the day. He could still spend the day learning. But again, can he go to synagogue? Yes. Should he be wearing a yarmulke, a skull cap on his head? I don't know. Is Mrs. Cohen going to think he's relevant to set up with his daughter? If so, that's a problem. Is he wearing a kippah that has on it, like it says on it, Noah, and it's very clear, and the rabbi knows that this is, so again, it depends on the dynamic of the relationship of the community you're in, what they could tolerate. And of course, us Jews have to be extremely sensitive to the Noahides, and the Noahides need to be patient with those Jews, because not all of us are aware of this beautiful and growing community. Okay, number 20 and 21. Among the ways of cleaving to God is to become attached to the Torah sages through learning from their upright conduct. So there's, of course, hearing their stories and being inspired by the stories, but there's also an element which is, if you find a leader, a spiritual leader, also see how he behaves, see how he manifests, see if you could go over. And it's tough. Do you invite yourself over to his house? Like it requires you to be a little brazen, but you want to see how he speaks to his wife, how he speaks to his kid. Does he really fully embody this? And that would probably be the best way for you to learn. This called shadowing someone. Of course, someone has to be comfortable with you doing this. It's a little easier if you're a student in a religious seminary. He's a teacher there, and you could always be walking around with him, but you'll see a practice with Jewish religious students. They walk with their rabbi home and they meet him outside the house, and they want to be with him constantly so they could see how he's behaving. And lastly, for any question or doubt a person has regarding the Torah law, his rabbi should be consulted, and the person should do as his rabbi says, even if there are other opinions. But if there is an explicit proof that his rabbi erred, the person should not act according to his rabbi's words. That doesn't mean completely ignore your rabbi. It just means with that specific case, you don't have to listen to your rabbi because you could see that he erred. And that's because ultimately rabbis are not saints, right? They could be righteous people, which is amazing, but we are seeking truth, and we will not be denied by anyone besides God for the truth we want. We have to do so respectfully, right? As in, we are being told, if you disagree with your rabbi, then you need to express yourself and speak up. Wait your turn, show him the right respect, how you're gonna disagree with him. Of course, all these things matter. But generally speaking, that's what we're looking for. It is also permissible to select rabbis, as in it could be, I have my rabbi for dietary restriction laws because he's phenomenal about that. But he's not my rabbi with regards to these other theological questions. And I have a different rabbi for that. One shouldn't do, I ask my rabbi, and my rabbi says, no, you can't do that. But then I know that your rabbi is very lenient. So I'm just going to ask your rabbi to get permission. No bueno, right? So because the attitude is that I'm just looking to get like permission to do this. Now, if I ask my rabbi and he says no, and I ask your rabbi and he says yes, and your rabbi shows me how my rabbi made a mistake, then I could accept what your rabbi says in that case. And I don't have to, I could decide to engage with my rabbi and bring it up to him if I want to. I could decide to just respectfully not, just nod my head and say, okay, and then take on the other opinion. With that, we conclude this chapter. I hope that was okay, Sandy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Next chapter is chapter 12, which is additional laws. Oh, and I think we might not finish additional laws in one day, but oh no, that was chapter 3, taking on additional commandments. Okay, very nice. So, and then is there another one? 14, ethical conduct, and ethical conduct. Okay, so in 3 weeks we will be done with Brit Shalom, and we'll be moving on to the prayer book. I think that's fantastic. I'm going to ask the group if we want Rabbi Shirky or Rabbi Goldberg to join us in some sort of a celebratory motion. If we decide to wait until we finish the prayer book and do that all together, obviously the community will decide. Sandy, thank you for participating.
Thank you.
For those who are watching, I see, oh, wow, 11 people. Interesting. Anyone that wants to join, ask, participate, the link is over there. I'll stay on for another minute just to see if anyone wants to join. If not, we appreciate. My pleasure, Lynn. Let's see. It also tells me where they're watching. Randos United 3. And then through Jacob's YouTube 1, his Twitch 1, and his Twitter 6. I don't even know what that means, people watching through Twitter, but hey guys, the Twitter people, the X people, sorry. Yeah. All right, Beseder.
And do you wish us to bring questions for Rabbi Cherky, or
if we are going to meet them, then I could say yes, and then I would say everyone should ask like a question or two. It depends how many people have questions. Let's submit it to him beforehand, so just he could prepare, and then that's definitely something we could do. All right.
Yes. Sorry, it feels respectful if you have somebody of their stature willing to spend some time out of their day just to come and celebrate with us, to ask them something.
As long as it's genuine. I'm saying, like, he also just enjoys the fact that this phenomenon is even happening. So like we are very fortunate to even be like, I thank you for giving us the time and day and considering this. So like that is already the gift. But yeah, I think it could be nice if there's a specific question that's bothering you or that you're curious about, then definitely we'll bring it up.
Looking forward to the next few weeks.
You got it. Take care, and I will see you around.
Enjoy. Thank you.
Bye.